The vast kingdom of Eryx stretched beyond the horizon, its borders as cruel and imposing as the king himself. King Eryx, a man of great power and unyielding resolve, ruled with a grip that tightened the air itself. His towering castle sat at the peak of the highest mountain, its cold stone walls reflecting the isolation of its ruler. But what made Eryx truly feared, beyond his martial prowess and strategic brilliance, was his ability to manipulate the minds of his people, especially the women. Women throughout the land whispered of his wrath, but no one dared speak of the horrors that were known only in hushed voices. His presence alone was enough to send tremors through the hearts of the bravest. To be summoned by King Eryx meant facing an uncertain fate, one that could twist from the court's grandeur to a terrifying and unpredictable punishment, depending on the king's mood. The king was known for his icy gaze, one that could pierce through even the strongest of hearts. When he looked at someone, they felt as though he had already stripped them of their secrets, laid bare before him. No woman was ever immune to this gaze, whether noble or commoner, none were spared. There was something about the king that twisted the air around him, making every woman feel both unseen and completely exposed at the same time. As the king's reign grew, so did his notoriety. Rumors spread far and wide about the disappearances of women who had once been in his favor, only to vanish without a trace. Some whispered of their fate in the dark corners of the kingdom, but no one dared speak too loudly, for fear of Eryx's judgment. Inside the royal court, silence ruled as absolutely as King Eryx himself. The halls were wide, adorned with banners of past victories, yet no warmth lived within those walls. Every footstep echoed too loudly, every breath felt like an intrusion. Women who entered the court learned quickly that words were dangerous things. A glance held too long, a posture too rigid, a hesitation at the wrong moment, any of it could draw the king's attention. Eryx rarely raised his voice. That was what made him terrifying. His judgments came calmly, almost gently, delivered with a measured tone that left no room for appeal. Women summoned before him often expected anger, but instead faced something far worse, indifference. He listened without expression, his fingers resting on the arm of his throne, his eyes fixed but unreadable. In that stillness, fear grew heavier than any shouted threat. Those who served within the palace spoke of an unspoken rule. King Eryx did not need to touch, accuse, or even explain. His authority was absolute because it was unpredictable. Women never knew why they were chosen or spared. Favor one day could become ruin the next, without warning or cause. This uncertainty hollowed them from within, teaching them to live in constant vigilance. Noble women feared him as deeply as commoners. Status offered no shield. In fact, those of high birth often felt his scrutiny more intensely, as if their privilege made them ideal subjects for his quiet tests of obedience. Dinners at the court were tense affairs, where laughter sounded forced and eyes remained lowered. No woman ever felt safe under his gaze, no matter how close she sat to power. Beyond the palace walls, the court's silence became legend. Mothers warned their daughters not with stories of monsters or war, but with the name of King Eryx. His reputation no longer needed proof. Fear traveled faster than truth, and under Eryx, fear was enough to govern an entire kingdom. To be noticed by King Eryx was not an honor. It was a burden that pressed down on the soul. Women who caught his attention found their lives subtly altered, as if an invisible hand had begun to rearrange their fate. Servants watched them more closely. Doors that were once open became guarded. Freedom narrowed, step by step, without explanation. Eryx understood the power of favor better than any ruler before him. He gave it sparingly, then withdrew it without warning. A woman praised in public could be isolated in private. A smile from the throne could mean elevation or quiet ruin. This shifting ground created a fear deeper than punishment itself. Punishment ended. Uncertainty did not. Many learned to fear being admired more than being ignored. The women of the court dressed carefully, spoke less, and trained themselves to appear unremarkable. Beauty, intelligence, confidence, qualities once valued, became liabilities under Eryx's rule. To stand out was to risk being drawn into his invisible web. The king never explained his choices. He allowed speculation to thrive because speculation kept people obedient. Every woman created her own version of his rules, adjusting her behavior to avoid his notice. In this way, Eryx ruled not only through law, but through imagination. He let fear complete the work his soldiers never had to begin. Outside the palace, stories grew darker. Villages whispered of women summoned to the capital for reasons never revealed. Some returned changed, quieter, careful with every word. Others did not return at all. No bodies were found. No trials were announced. Absence became the message. Under King Eryx, fear was not loud or bloody. It was patient. It waited. And for the women of the kingdom, that waiting was the cruelest part of all. Fear under King Eryx did not need proclamations. It moved quietly, carried from woman to woman in whispers and glances. Older women taught the younger ones how to survive long before they ever saw the palace. They spoke of posture, silence, restraint. They warned that curiosity was dangerous and honesty could be fatal. These lessons were not written, yet they were remembered more faithfully than any law. Girls learned early that the king's reach extended far beyond his throne. Even in distant villages, his shadow shaped behavior. A young woman's name spoken too loudly in praise could invite unwanted attention. A complaint, however small, could travel upward in twisted form. Under Eryx, women learned to erase themselves just enough to remain unseen. The king's greatest weapon was not force, but reputation. He allowed rumors to spread unchecked. Each story grew darker than the last, until truth no longer mattered. What mattered was belief. And belief kept women cautious even when he was not present. Inside the palace, this fear became ritual. Women entering service were taught when to lower their eyes, how long to wait before speaking, when silence was safer than obedience. Mistakes were never corrected twice. Those who failed once were rarely seen again, and no one asked where they went. Eryx understood that fear inherited itself. By shaping how mothers spoke to daughters, he ruled generations without lifting a hand. His power outlived his actions, embedding itself in memory and habit. Long after a woman left the court, she carried his influence within her, measured in pauses and lowered gazes. In this way, King Eryx became more than a ruler. He became a presence, one that women felt even in safety, even in dreams. And that presence, more than any decree or punishment, was why his name was spoken with trembling respect. What frightened women most about King Eryx was not cruelty, but the absence of mercy. Mercy required emotion, and Eryx showed none. He did not rage, plead, or justify. His decisions fell like stone, heavy, final, unmoved by tears or explanations. Women learned quickly that appealing to his humanity was useless, because he ruled as if humanity were irrelevant. Those brought before him sensed this immediately. He listened without interruption, his expression unchanged, as though the outcome had already been decided long before the words were spoken. Hope died quietly in that chamber. Not in screams, but in the slow realization that nothing said would alter the king's will. Stories spread of women who begged, not for forgiveness, but for understanding. None received either. Eryx believed that uncertainty strengthened authority. By denying mercy, he denied closure. Women left his presence carrying unanswered questions that haunted them longer than any sentence could have. This lack of mercy reshaped behavior across the kingdom. Women stopped seeking justice. Complaints faded. Silence became protection. Even when wronged, many chose endurance over risk, knowing that drawing attention could lead to a fate worse than injustice. Recognition by the king. Eryx never needed to be cruel often. His reputation did the work for him. Each unresolved story became a warning, retold with growing dread. Over time, fear replaced hope entirely. Women no longer asked what was right or fair. They asked only what would keep them invisible. In the end, King Eryx ruled not through terror alone, but through emotional void. And for the women of his kingdom, that emptiness, cold, absolute, and unyielding, was far more frightening than anger ever could be. Over time, fear under King Eryx ceased to feel extraordinary. It became routine. Women no longer reacted to it with shock or resistance. Instead, they adapted. Fear blended into daily life, shaping habits, decisions, and even thoughts. It was no longer something to escape, but something to manage. In the cities, women walked with measured steps, careful not to attract notice. In the countryside, they avoided questions and learned to accept uncertainty as part of existence. Even joy was restrained, expressed quietly, as if too much happiness might draw attention. Under Eryx, restraint became survival. The most dangerous moment was change. A sudden promotion, an unexpected summons, a rumor spreading too quickly, any shift in routine could signal danger. Women learned to fear opportunity as much as punishment. Advancement meant visibility, and visibility was risk. Within the palace, this normalization of fear reached its deepest form. Servants carried out their duties with flawless obedience, not because they trusted the king, but because fear had replaced will. They anticipated his expectations without being told, shaping themselves around an authority that never explained itself. Eryx watched this transformation with quiet satisfaction. A kingdom that fears consistently does not rebel. Women, once the emotional backbone of families and communities, became silent anchors, absorbing anxiety so others could function. Fear flowed through them first, then outward. By the time some realized how deeply it had taken root, it was too late. Fear no longer announced itself. It simply existed. And in that existence, King Eryx achieved something greater than domination. He achieved permanence. In the later years of King Eryx's reign, he spoke less than ever. He no longer needed to explain, threaten, or declare. His silence carried more authority than any speech. Women feared this silence most of all, because it offered no clues, no warnings, no patterns to follow. Summons from the palace became rarer, but more frightening. When they came, they arrived without reason or detail. A sealed message, a guarded escort, a journey taken in silence. Many believed that Eryx had learned the final refinement of power, ruling through absence. Women who stood before him noticed how little he moved. Age had not softened him. His gaze remained sharp, his posture unchanged. He let others speak while he listened, and when he dismissed them, it was often with a single gesture. No judgment spoken aloud. No explanation given. Only consequences felt afterward. The people began to understand that the king was no longer reacting to the kingdom. The kingdom was reacting to him. Women adjusted their lives around what they imagined he might do, not what he had done. In this way, fear became predictive, shaping the future before it occurred. Legends formed in this silence. Some claimed Eryx could see betrayal before it happened. Others believed he punished thoughts, not actions. The truth mattered less than the effect. Women guarded their words, their faces, even their expressions when alone. By then, King Eryx had become more idea than man. And ideas are harder to escape than rulers. For the women of the kingdom, fear no longer came from the throne. It lived within them, steady and unspoken. When King Eryx finally vanished from the public eye, no announcement was made. There was no funeral, no declaration of death, no clear ending. The throne passed to another, banners changed, and the court resumed its rituals under a new name. Yet for the women of the kingdom, nothing truly changed. They still lowered their eyes. They still measured their words. They still felt tension when footsteps echoed behind them in long halls. Fear did not leave with the king, because it had never depended on his presence. Eryx had ruled long enough for fear to become instinct. New rulers promised fairness, clarity, even mercy. But women listened carefully and believed slowly. They had learned that power did not need cruelty to harm, only silence and unpredictability. The memory of Eryx lingered in pauses, in hesitation, in the careful way women taught their daughters to survive authority. Stories of King Eryx grew darker with time. Some details faded, others sharpened. He became a symbol of control without explanation, judgment without voice. Mothers invoked his name not as history, but as warning. A reminder of how easily fear could replace freedom. Even generations later, women spoke of a feeling they could not name. A tightening in the chest when authority watched too closely. A quiet instinct to disappear rather than be noticed. This was Eryx's true legacy. He was no longer a man, nor even a king. He was a lesson carved into memory. And that was why women feared King Eryx more than any ruler, because his power did not end. It endured.